I mean, the Chinese are just absolutely, I mean, they can't believe their luck, right? America is essentially torching its network of alliances, it's destroying its global hegemon position. And the Chinese just we're not having to do anything, right? They're just sitting back and watching as America just destroys its own, base of its power. So for Beijing, they probably will. I think they probably will try and take Taiwan at some point in the next decade. You can see them steadily building up their navy. They're coming closer to Taiwan's air defense zone. There's multiple incursions into that actually. World War Three is probably overstating it a little bit because in regards to the Chinese, they do have revisionist designs on Taiwan, of course, but it looks like the Americans probably wouldn't go to Taiwan's aid at this point. I mean, if you're the Taiwanese, you definitely would have to assume that they're not going to do that. And if you look at what the Americans are saying, Pete Hegseth, which is he's the U.S. Defense Secretary, he was saying a week and a half ago, that it would take 7 years for the Americans to be able to challenge Russia's navy. Well, I mean that was ridiculous and it was wrong. But if you imagine the Americans trying to challenge the Chinese navy, and the Chinese have the world's largest shipbuilding capability at the moment, far bigger than the Americans, and they are building a huge number of surface combatants each year. They're training. They have a world leading advantage in drone technology. The majority of the small drones that are used in Ukraine by both sides are Chinese, right? They're made by DJI. And China has this massive advantage in that field. Also, the thing about the Chinese are smart. They're they're totalitarian, they're authoritarian, and they're aggressive, but they're not stupid. And I think this is what a lot of people forget, and that they're far smarter than the Americans in this regard. They are willing to work patiently towards what they consider to be core strategic goals, i.e. Taiwan. And the Americans aren't. The Americans don't seem to have any strategic vision at all. They're alienating allies, as I said. They're, I mean, what is this American view of the world? Like, what does the Trump administration want the world to look like in 10 years' time? I have no idea. There's this fantasy talk about splitting Russia away from China. But that is just fantasy. It's no credible analyst believes that the Chinese and the Russians can be split apart, partly because of geography, partly because they both distrust the Americans, regardless of Trump's overtures. So yeah, it's kind of depressing to see this strategic idiocy in Washington that's just upending the global order, and it's destroying American power. It will destroy American prosperity as well, because America grew rich on the post-war security order, which they manufactured, and they seem to be throwing it all away. He lies as easily as he breathes. He's a trained intelligence officer. Lying is his trade, right? That's what he does. Is everyone forgetting that for like 2 months before the full-scale invasion, every Russian official, including Putin, was saying, "Oh, we're not going to invade Ukraine. It's a fantasy. It's Western lies. It's propaganda." And what happened? They invaded Ukraine, and then everyone seems to forget this. You can never trust a word that comes out of Vladimir Putin's lips or any other Russian official. They are always lying, or if they're not lying, they are, they're telling the truth because they think it kind of coincides with their, narrative. So no, you can never trust him. And he would probably say the same thing, frankly. He'd be amazed that people are trusting him, because and he views Western leaders generally as easily manipulated. He views Trump as someone who he's infatuated by Putin's power, I think. And you can see this in his relationships with other authoritarians. He talks to America's enemies in a way and with a level of respect that he doesn't talk to, America's allies. See how he talks to Justin Trudeau of Canada, referring to him as Governor Trudeau and belittling him and saying, "Oh no, you're going to be the 51st state." And then see how he talks to Putin. "Oh, I trust him. He's a very good guy. We have a very good friendship. We went through this Russia hoax together." Yeah, Putin is he's incredibly lucky. He views it, and you can look at Russian television, and they are openly gloating about the Americans and about how the Americans have done this complete 180 and they're on Moscow's side, and how, easy to manipulate they are, because they are. That's the stupid thing about Trump's administration. Not only are they incredibly naive, but they're also just incredibly easy to manipulate. You could actually see this with Keir Starmer, and I have no criticism for this, but I'm just saying it because it's obvious, right? When Keir Starmer gave him a letter from the king, you could see his eyes. He was like a kid in a sweet shop, a kid on Christmas morning that had just been given a massive Lego set. I mean, it's just like, he's so easy to manipulate, and everyone knows how to push his buttons. And this is like the worst thing you want when you're dealing in like these massive geopolitical issues. You don't want to be so easily read. You don't want to be so easily manipulated, because someone like Putin will come along, and he's not an idiot, and he will manipulate you. He will tell you everything he thinks you want to hear, and he won't mean a word of it. I've been speaking to soldiers on the ground, and while there's always a lag in decisions made in Washington or European capitals and what actually happens on the battlefield here, what you are seeing is a sense of betrayal and really disbelief amongst soldiers. They really don't understand why a country that was their ally, that said that they would stand with them for as long as it takes, has suddenly decided to pivot almost entirely towards Moscow, and start ratcheting up this extraordinary pressure on Ukraine. Cancelling weapons deliveries, yesterday cancelling intelligence sharing, decisions which, will have a real world impact. They will result in more Ukrainians needlessly dying. They feel, the world is against us, or at least significant parts of the world is against us. So, they feel really that they have only themselves, their colleagues, and, their European allies to rely on now. It's definitely boosted support around Zelensky. You're seeing his approval ratings, hitting levels that we only really saw in February, March 2022, immediately after the full-scale invasion started. And that is simply because of these external attacks on him, these ridiculous attacks as well, calling him a dictator, saying that he wants to continue the war when he really doesn't want to continue the war. What he wants is a just and sustainable peace for Ukraine. But he knows that if you agree some unenforced ceasefire with no security guarantees, then Russia will just start the war again at a time of its choosing. And that's essentially the problem here.
You made a strong signal to Ukrainian people, to Ukrainian warriors, to civilians, to all our families. And it's great that we are not alone. We feel it and we know it. Thank you so much for everything.